In this quick video, I'm going to do an example of marking one of the student lab books from the first year lab. So here we are on Blackboard. I'm going to click on the Grade Center Needs Marking. You'll find that you should have been assigned number of the lab book assignments. So that should be automatically assigned to you. I think there's around 10 to 15 assignments each week per teaching staff member. Now all students will submit, however, this is an optional feedback process for the students. Okay, so here are all the ones we've received. I can see them all. I'll pick one here and we'll start to look at what the system is for marking an example like this. So first of all, I'm going to get more screen here. And so you can cycle through the attempts if you've got them, and it will show you what needs marking. And there's going to be a lot of variety here between different students, especially at the beginning of semester. Okay, so we've got the main document that they've scanned. There's some tools here. The most important tool you may or may not use is the annotation tool. That will let you write on the document. And the other important point I want to show you is, I guess this side panel contains the rubric for marking. So if you click on that drop down bar here, it will show you the link to the rubric, and there's a box here called feedback to learner. So my fear is that students who submit work online in this fashion, the feedback to them can get lost, and depending on how easy it is for them to navigate this kind of platform, this Blackboard platform, we want to ensure that whatever feedback we give them is probably contained in one central box. You may decide to mark the actual document itself using your annotation tools. That may be fine. And some of this process over the initial few weeks is figuring out what works best. My initial hunch is that on their grade center, they'll get a mark for an assignment, and there'll be a box, I think, for the feedback that they'll see. So I want to make sure that that's very conspicuous, and rather than hiding it on the scan document, I'm probably more interested in just collating the feedback in one box, and this is potentially where we can put it. Now, I made a rubric to guide us all into marking the lab book. Remember, this is formative marking, so there's no kind of sum, there's no number attached to the assignment. We want to make sure that we give them advice on the key parts of the lab book, and these parts are listed in the rubric. I'm going to just bring up the rubric as a separate window so we can see the full thing. And the sections are the pre-lab prep, basics, the equipment and setup, objectives and conclusions, procedure, reflection, data presentation, and an overall. And I've only put two kind of main categories here: needs improvement and satisfactory. And what I want students just to see is where they're at in different parts of their lab book record keeping. So we can easily show them by clicking on the rubric. And initially, most students will be needing improvement for the various parts. And as we go through the year, they'll start to kind of develop further and further using our feedback, hopefully, and becoming more and more adept at keeping good and complete lab book records. There's another box here that's called feedback to learner at the end of the rubric. And what we can do is enter our feedback here. There is also the option that when we select an individual entry, that we can add individual feedback for that part of the rubric. I'm less inclined to do that because, again, that puts feedback in too many places, which the students may or may not look. So we may try to collate our feedback, so it's all in one place. Okay, so if you've got a big monitor, of course, you can keep this window and you can then enter in and then save the final part. Otherwise, you got to use this sidebar here. And the only difficulty is that when you scroll on the sidebar to see the rubric, it also scrolls the main page. But if you click on the main page, you can scroll that individually. Okay? So let's see what we can do here. So the pre-lab prep, this is essentially the days before the lab session. reading up on the experiment or the lab session, the skill session in this case, and taking some notes. And we can see also by the date whether this was far before the session or was it the day of the session potentially. I don't see a clear point here that says this was preparation. This first page kind of indicates to me that this is their actual session because there's data and there's measurements. So I think the pre-lab prep needs improvement. The next part is basics. Basics are, of course, we can show descriptions here if you want. The basics are title, dates, stating the lab partner, and of course useful diagrams. And we can see that there's dates, and I don't see a lab partner stated, which isn't too surprising at this point because they don't know the other students in the first week, but we would expect them to do it nonetheless, to ask who they're working with. And so we've got certainly a date. Lab partner, no. I don't see any diagrams, and I think there's always an example where you need diagrams and a quick sketch. Whenever you're keeping lab book records, sketches can save a lot of time from writing descriptions. And potentially in this skill session, there wasn't an explicit setup. There wasn't an explicit thing that you needed to sketch. But nonetheless, I want to keep reminding people this is probably useful. So definitely the basics needs improvement. Let's keep going. The next section is called equipment and setup. And to be satisfactory, we want to make sure the equipment is listed with model numbers and potentially stating the resolution of the equipment. And in this case, up at the very top, we've got equipment, and we've got generic kind of descriptions like vernier calipers, micrometers. There's no information on the specific model numbers or their resolutions. So that again needs improvement. The next section is objectives and conclusions. So we want something at the beginning that says what we're aiming to do, and then something at the end giving us a clear summary of what we think we accomplished in this session. So let's scroll back here. There was an initial aim. It's quite general, but it's probably sufficient in this session because it's quite a basic session. At the end, do we have anything that wraps up? Okay, we've got a conclusion paragraph. So for me, the end of your session is more or less a summary. Maybe you don't have a conclusion at this point because it's still quite early. You may need to do further analysis, but certainly a summary just to wrap up for your future brain to kind of read what you thought occurred in the session. Was it a good session or a bad session? And what was the key kind of take-home points? Here, if I zoom in, I can see my results for the density of the coin were accurate, but the paper was not. I think to improve this, we could use, I think to improve the accuracy of the thickness, I would measure many papers together. Of course, that's good. So it's a little bit of a summary and what they would do in future. So not too bad. One thing they haven't done is stated the actual results there, just to summarize what the results were. So I think, again, it needs improvement. The next section is the procedure. So again, to be satisfactory, we want the details of the method used, what was done, so what they did, rather than some list of instructions. So the procedure also needs to be valid. So again, in the first instance, we don't normally expect students to have this capability. So let's just have a look at what they recorded. Not a lot of methodology stated. Okay, that's not much at all really. So let's mark that as needs improvement. And reflection. Reflection is for me the key thing that when you're doing work, typically it's done on your own terms. You've set something up, and it could be an experiment that is quite specific to your style of working. Perhaps it's different from what other people are doing. So you need to have some ongoing reflection on how you think the experiment is going. And was there any issues in the setup? What was your initial impression of the data? Do you think the data was good or bad? So this is all very useful for your future self a few days later to read, so you can remind yourself of how you felt the session went. Too few comments on reflection doesn't really kind of help you down the line when you need to kind of recollect how the session went. And a few short comments can really do a lot of positive work to reassure you that it went okay. And the absence of such comments can make you worry that maybe things went badly, but you didn't state it. So it's better to state ongoing quick comments, thumbs up, thumbs down, something happened, something didn't happen, or it's all good, very simply. So must be something with the volume. So they've commented on some of the results as they've gone along. But again, this kind of ties in with their kind of procedural comments. There's not a lot of it, and there's really just results in some basic analysis. Okay, here we go. Data for this assessed from this. This is the, okay, so they're comparing results. My result was within the error margins. Okay, a little bit of reflection, but more needed. So in the initial first week, we're going to be providing lots of needs improvement, and it's good. It's good for us to point the way towards the students, and they will take this to heart. And data presentation. So we've got tables here. So we want tables that are very clear, preferably lined, and well proportioned. No overwriting in the table, so the data is very clearly stated. If they're recording data files, we want to make sure that there's some record of what the files are, where they're stored, and what are the file names. So data. Let's see, overwriting already, so it's a classic problem. And we can see also that there is a relatively good effort to put the table in there on the page. There's some overwriting, and this is the overwriting that really gets me. I don't mind if there's a mistake when it's crossed out, but the overwriting does introduce confusion if this number is 5 or 6, for example. So we want to nip that in the bud early on and say that needs improvement. So this is ultimately overall need improvement. We can write in our comments and then save our rubric. And those comments you'll have to summarize yourself. And this will be a 0. I think for now we'll make it a 0 when it needs improvement overall, and if it's satisfactory, we'll put in number 1 here, and then we'll save it. Okay, so that I think is pretty much what I want to show you. Other than writing the feedback at the end, that's the main gist. Okay.